Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Making of. I'm your host, Mike Valinsky, and today I'm excited to welcome director Paris Barclay and editor Scott Hanson, ACE. Paris is a two-time Emmy-winning director, has worked on countless shows, including Sons of Anarchy, Glee, In Treatment, Cold Case, CSI, NYPD Blue, American Horror Story, Station 19, The Night Agent, and Monster, to name a few. Scott is an Emmy-nominated editor who has cut films such as Dolemite is My Name, The Dissident, McMillions, About My Father, and Born to Bowl. This duo collaborated on the incredible documentary Billy Preston, That's the Way God Planned It, about one of America's greatest musicians. For those that do not know, Billy played with the Beatles on two landmark albums, as well as playing with Ray Charles, the Rolling Stones, Eric Clapton, and many more. He also had his own remarkable career, which we will get into. I thought we could invite on this filmmaking team to hear about the making of Billy Preston, That's the Way God Planned It, their creative collaboration, and more. However, before we dive in, we'd like to thank our friends at AJA Video Systems, Broadfield Distributing, OWC, and Zeiss. Now on to the main show. Paris and Scott, good morning.
Welcome.
Good morning.
Glad,
Good morning.
glad you're having us.
So I thought we could jump into the making of this project, but for a minute, can you share a little bit about where you're both from and your early inspirations to get into this business?
Oh, that's a good
Oh,
question. I am from Chicago Heights, Illinois, and I grew up there until I went to high school in a small boarding school in Indiana with our now Chief Justice, John Roberts, by the way. From there, I went to Harvard, and then I went to New York, and I thought I would be a composer. So my life has just taken all these interesting twists and turns. And from composing, I directed music videos and then began directing shows and eventually this incredible documentary.
I did most of my growing up around Houston and was involved in theater growing up, on stage and backstage, and pursued that through college. But came to the understanding that I was perhaps not the best actor. And the live theater experience is really satisfying for the actor. And I realized that I really enjoyed the process of all the choices that you make creatively in putting up a show. And that led me to film school. And after film school, I started in advertising, did 1,000 commercials and worked in that world. And then wanted to get into longer format and transitioned into documentaries and ended up working with Paris on this project. And this is where we got to meet for the first time, and really proud of the film that came out of it.
It's an incredible documentary. I just watched it, really moving, but also what a musician, what a talent. Honestly, for those that don't know, I mean, Billy Preston was just such an incredible musician. So, Paris, how did this project come to you?
Well, it's an interesting story because White Horse Pictures, which does documentaries for a living, I mean, they made the Beatles 8 Days a Week, they made Pavarotti, they made the Bee Gees, How Do You Mend a Broken Heart, and non-music documentaries too, like Lucy and Desi. They approached Stephanie Elaine, who was a producer who brought us Boys in the Hood and Hustle and Flow. And I've known Stephanie socially. We hadn't worked on anything. And she became obsessed with the idea that I should be directing this documentary, which I was surprised by because I haven't really done a full-length feature documentary before. I've done documentary-style commercials. I've done a documentary with LL Cool J for, the old VHS release. That's how long ago that was. But I hadn't done a feature documentary. But when I started reading Daniel Shaw's book, Daniel Shaw had done a proposal for a book about Billy Preston. I said, this story is deep and interesting and tributaries. And he's a zealot of modern music. And there's so much to dive into that I became fascinated with it. And so I signed on. But that was back in 2021, now 5 years ago that we started. We were slowed a bit by COVID. We did some of the interviews with our masks on and testing and all that other stuff. But most of the interviews were done in 22 and 23. Then we started cutting. We brought Scott on, and I think we locked the picture just in late 2024 and hit the festival circuit. now we're in theaters, and we played about 60 different cities, and you can still find out where to find it. And I'll do this early in case someone misses it on billyprestonfilm.com, because we're all around the country.
So you have so much archival footage, so much concert footage. Then you captured interviews with some incredible people. Everybody who's still with us. How did you, I guess, in pre-production, as you're formulating your thoughts, figure out what do we want to capture? You have this treasure trove. How did you go about it?
Well, we started by bringing on Cheo Hodari Coker, who is a great writer who brought us lots of fantastic television, and also is a musicologist, essentially, who knows music up and down. And he and I put together an outline of what we thought the story might be. And that outline grew as we said, oh, it could be this, it could be that. We could talk to this person and they could say this. We don't know what's going to happen. We just made our best guess. That outline went through many, many drafts. And then once we started looking at it as a story, because it's all about what's the story of Billy Preston, it found its structure of 3 acts, which still persists to this day, more or less. And then we started interviewing people, and then they told us the story was different. And so I guess that's what happens in a documentary, right, Scott? Once you get to the interviews, you find out what your real story is. And the interviewers took us to different tributaries and shaded things in different ways. So we found that we had to reshape our story, not just during the interviews, just on paper. And then once we got into the editing room, we were still making another story, which then delves with how do we tell the story visually? How do we make it exciting? How do we include the music? And that impacts how the story goes too. So it's a really interesting process. I would love to do it again, now that I know a little bit more than I did then. But without, Scott being able to sit on literally huge hard drives of potential material. And he's looking at the story that we originally planned, and he's trying to figure out how we can tell it. It's like his genius that helps to just make it all make sense. So that I'll throw to you, Scott. How do you deal with, I'm not been an editor. I can't edit. Sure. I don't know how you just deal with looking at all this stuff and figuring out what goes where.
Well, the big key before you start looking through, hundreds of thousands of hours of footage is you have to sort of know what you're looking for or why you're looking. And that starts with a vision that's set out by the director, by Paris and by Cheo, about what is it that's important about this story, because they certainly had reasons for wanting to tell the story. And then, like Paris talks about, they go out on the interviews and that shifts and changes and you discover things. And you want it to be more, you don't want to just do a chronology of everyone Billy Preston played with and leave that on the table, because you can Google that. That's not a story. And so the things that I took from the vision that they had cast was that we were looking for ways to get into the humanity of Billy, right? And hear more about who he was as a person, what his struggles were, what his successes were, what they meant to him, all those sort of internal dilemmas that have more of an emotional weight to them. So then you're going through footage and you've got these moments where you want to talk about, the Beatles is a big high water mark for him. And we have this footage from Peter Jackson that they gave us from Get Back that includes footage that was not in Get Back. They gave us everything that Billy was in. And so there's moments in there that all of a sudden you get a chance to see how he and George Harrison really connected in these candid moments, not just collaborating on music, but just talking about, what chord is this and how they came about to record That's the Way God Planned It, So you're looking for those moments, because that moment might fly by if you're making a movie about something else entirely. Like if you were making a movie about the technology of the music recording industry or something, you would never use that clip, right? But we know we want to tell a story about him and his relationships and his personal life as much as his professional life. So that's, you're looking at everything through those lenses, and then culling it in and culling and sculpting away. And eventually you arrive at a film and you're done.
It's so easy. It's really
so easy.
It's just so easy. I mean,
yeah.
I just before you, and I think Scott hit on something. What are the linchpins there? What are the things that we keep coming back to? And it's really faith and family and the effect of fame. It's the three F's. So in the faith story, we had to go through as much as we could of his early life and the music that developed in the church and how that had such a profound influence. With family, it was tougher because there's very little surviving members of his family. And so we had to really, really dig there. We know we're going to look for somebody, but fortunately, we got Derek Preston, his nephew, to talk to us, and a few other family members gave us some photos and things like that. And then fame, because Billy had a love-hate relationship with fame. And I think he mostly loved it, but also found it difficult, especially because, he was a gay man who did not feel he would be accepted in the industry and in his church. So that made it even trickier for him. And so digging into finding what are the clips that help us tell that. And we found like hundreds of interviews of Billy Preston where he tells us virtually nothing. That's the thing. Usually you can find a subject who will, in some interview, some obscure, magazine that they talk to will give you a little something. But Billy said the same things over and over again, that my life was as God planned it, that my gift is a God-given talent, and he was very circumspect. So that made our lives even trickier.
So he was a private guy, but one of the most public, famous, talented musicians of that era.
Yeah, and David Ritz talks about that. He's a great biographer of music figures, so he's dealt with Marvin Gaye and Aretha Franklin and all these great musicians. But Billy, he wanted to write a book, but Billy wouldn't give it up. He just said, I couldn't get Billy to get beyond, just the surface and just talk really about his personal life and what hurt he was feeling. And so we've had to get his best friends and people who've known him virtually his entire life to give us that part of the story.
And there's a moment even in the film where we highlight that with an anecdote about his wigs, that he would wear the wigs on stage so he could be this character version of himself, this, rock star version. And then he would take the wig off so that he could just be regular people, as he put it. And I think that's a perfect example of the kind of internal sort of struggle that he had with that fame. It's funny how it shows up in all these places.
Because Mick Jagger, in the film, you'll see Mick Jagger jazzes him about it and just pokes him a little bit. And Mick Jagger says he didn't like that. It's sort of Mick Jagger was getting at the facade and all the different versions of himself he wanted to present as opposed to who he really was. And that made him bristle, which is really interesting.
From Mick Jagger, who's...
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. He should talk.
Yeah. So let me ask, we have a lot of filmmakers that tune in, and you both really crushed it as far as this collaboration. Again, incredible doc. How did you settle into your creative collaboration, your workflow? I don't know if you're based in the same city. I don't know if you met once a week, or can you take us behind the scenes of that?
Well, I'll start. I really don't like being in the editing room. I mean, some directors love it. They love to sit there all day. They love to watch every cut. It is not my style. It has never been my style. There are almost 200 episodes of television. I like to trust the editor, and I like to give him notes and direction and sometimes specific stuff on specific scenes. But I don't really want to micromanage them because the honest truth is I want this to be better than what I can imagine. So the more I left Scott alone, the better the picture was getting. And so I basically decided I'll just comment, I'll send in notes. And then we came in for a little bit for a couple of weeks. But even then, I didn't really hang all the time. I think my presence is just like a thing. And Scott on his own, he spent a lot of time with this movie just by himself, just refining things and fixing transitions and making the sound better. So the music of the documentary goes all the way through in a seamless manner. And that's stuff that, I could sit there and watch him do that, but it's like moving this, that shit bores me.
Nobody wants to watch that.
But the final effect is subtle, and it made it smooth. It made it feel like it flowed from one thing to another, which is what Scott spent probably endless hours just perfecting. So we really worked largely apart. There was a time when we came into the editing room getting close to locking picture with all of the producers, and that was like a free-for-all. Everyone's talking. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone's looking at every cut, and Scott's just sitting there going, oh, okay, well, let's try this. And, maybe this will work. And just being the sort of equanimity that we needed when everyone has such a strong point of view.
When I joined on, I was sort of the last one to the party because they had been shooting and getting a lot of the interviews in the can and shaping their sensibility about what they wanted the movie to be about.
And to be honest, we had an editor who had to leave for personal reasons. So we were in a period, normally we would have brought Scott on much sooner if we had had Scott, and he would have helped us from the very beginning. I would have invited him to some of the interviews just to get a sense of the people. But we had another editor who's just very fragments of their work actually remains in the movie because Scott sort of tore it all to shreds and put it back together again in a very interesting way. So Scott was a little later than the editor usually is. Sorry, Scott.
No, that's quite all right. And it's fair to Dava. I came on board after a lot of the interviews had been shot, almost all of them. And so I needed catch-up time anyway. So Paris' preference for not sitting there watching the editor watch everything gave me some time and space to see all the interviews, get my head wrapped around the material. And I was approaching it. I did not know that much about Billy Preston. So for me, a documentary is always the most fun to work on when I'm either learning something or it's a subject matter that I'm already a fan of. I've done some other music doc projects. I was learning a lot about Billy Preston. So I was just going deep down into the rabbit hole of his life and learning all about him, and sort of came out the other side with a sense of the material. And then, as an editor, you're there to serve the director's vision, right? And so Paris was very good about communicating, like, these are the things that are important about Billy, that things that Cheo and he wanted to tell and focus on. And so then it's about setting those priorities. And it's a little bit of just process work to get it culled down to, like, okay, here are the ingredients that we can use. What do we have an abundance of? What are we lacking? And then it's what does archival footage bring to the table? Patrick Ryan, our archival researcher, found all kinds of great stuff. And then suddenly you don't need an interview to say this. A piece of archival will do it, or support it, or counterscore it. All kinds of options. And then when we got the film sort of up on its feet for the first time, then there was a really kind of great, for me anyway, well, I'm sure for Paris too, but like collaboration back and forth with notes and direction, and having that freedom and the trust to pursue 3 or 4 different ideas on a direction or a beat or a scene, and share that with Paris, and then talk about why that's working or not, or why that's successful or not for the intention, makes for great fun. Instead of feeling like you're under the gun and have to get it right the first time, you have the freedom to try things and experiment and see what works, see what doesn't. And then when it got down to the granular, we were all in the room together, and that's when we're really dialing in, down to like half a beat of what is the moment about and what are we trying to say. And that's sort of how it was in one of those meetings where we landed on the opening of Concert for Bangladesh, and such a great call. I love that opening. But anyway, that's how I came on board and what our collaboration was like.
So let me rewind for a second. Paris, how did you go about scoring some of these interviews? No pun intended. With some of these legends. Can you tell us about that?
Well, it really helped that Nigel Sinclair, White Horse Pictures, and Jeannie Alpens-Festa were really the major negotiators for most of the interviews. They were the ones who went out and reached. Nigel was the one who found the Judge Kamens, who plays a pivotal role in the documentary, talking about when and why he sentenced Billy to prison. So we made a list, and they sort of launched their search and reached out. The only one that I really had to be involved with was Eric Clapton, because Eric Clapton was not necessarily willing to do an interview. So we wrote and went through several drafts of an impassioned letter that I wrote directly to him, and Jonathan Clyde, his friend, delivered it to him. And so Eric did come on board, and Jonathan Clyde, the head of Apple Records, or Apple Inc., I guess it is, did the interview because Jonathan had known Eric a long time. And rather than put someone new there, we thought Jonathan would be a friend that he could talk to directly. And when you see the movie and you see the interviews, you see the impact of that. Eric gives a very revealing and very emotional take on Billy Preston that helps the whole last third of the film to really reveal more about who he is and what the relationship would be. So a lot of it just came from the stealth work of our producers. I mean, Ringo Starr, we did secure when he was in town, but most everyone was willing to talk. I mean, I can't think of, we were not denied. I mean, Eric was a struggle, but we got it. But most people wanted to say something about Billy Preston because they loved him.
And Eric gave a great interview, and you could tell they were quite close, and yeah, it just really added a lot of power to the doc.
Yeah, I admiration for him. I mean, I didn't know Eric Clapton very well. I'm not an Eric Clapton collector. So I just saw him in a new light, but there had been some stuff about him around COVID and shit like that. But personally, when he actually reveals who he is and how he loves and what his sobriety means to him and what his sobriety meant to his relationship with Billy Preston, I found a man that I could really admire.
And he really tried. I think he was, I don't know for how long, but helping to keep Billy clean and sober. And then at some point, as is the program, you got to let the friend walk.
Yeah, let him go. And that becomes one of the key messages, I think, of the movie and why I'm so proud. It's more than just telling Billy's great story, illuminating his power and majesty, and telling the history of how that he funkified pop music and changed a lot of the things from, Sly Stone and all of the things that are outgrowths of Billy Preston's magic. But it also talks about how difficult it is to deal with someone who's struggling with addiction and dealing with someone who has a history of shame that they haven't quite dealt with. And so many people you hear in the documentaries tried to reach him and tried to make a change and tried to help him get to where they felt he needed to go, but they all failed. And Billy eventually died. And so I hope that this is a cautionary tale, that not that you give up and not that it's impossible to help people, but that maybe it takes more. We're fortunate that now the times have changed a bit and recovery is more of a thing that lots of people are enjoying, including myself. But Billy missed that time by about 10 years. But now in this time, how are we going to help the next Billy Preston? Whether that is a brilliant musician or just someone you love in your family, the documentary should leave you with the question, how can I help that person that I love? What can I do more? And why, have I done enough? I mean, it certainly made me, I've talked about this before, but it's made me reevaluate my relationship with Corey Monteith in Glee, whom I kind of left alone, even though I'd been sober a long time and I knew he was struggling. I think if I had made this film before, I would have been much more active in trying to reach him and, being a friend and doing what Sandra Crouch says in the movie, risking losing that friendship to save his life. And I'm hoping people get that from the movie and are willing to now take a little bit more risk with the people that they love.
So where can folks check out the film? Is it in theaters? Is it digital yet? Is it both?
It is playing in theaters. I believe it is still in New York at the Roxy. But where you can get the screenings in your town are on billyprestonfilm.com. We post them as they come up. It's moving on an independent, largely through Lemley and other independent cinemas. And we want to do that and keep it in theaters. And we want to have people have the experience of seeing it in the theaters before it shows up on your television. So please go look out and see where it is near you and go to see it in the theater because it's a huge shitload of fun. I mean, the
so
audience
great
reacts, Scott.
It's so great with the crowd. It's so great with the crowd.
They laugh at places where we had hoped they would laugh and we're so excited. And they're moved in places where they applaud. Sandra Crouch always gets a hand when she says, "Ooh, it would be such a good thing if church was what we say it is." And everyone goes, "Whoa, pastor." It's just those moments they hit differently when you're with a group of people. So it's worth going to see it.
Well, I mean, there are incredible concert scenes that are just coming out of the screen, and
when Patti LaBelle and Joe Cocker do "You Are So Beautiful," I mean, the audience almost wants to stand up then and just do along with the crowd at Motown. For those of you who haven't yet seen the film, there is a sequence, I think it's a Motown anniversary special, where Patti LaBelle and Joe Cocker duet on "You Are So Beautiful." Billy plays the piano, and she just tears the song up and starts stepping and just brings the gospel. And it's so moving, and it's such a great fusion of how Billy Preston's music, as he often said, really came from God and came from the church And even a song like You Are So Beautiful, which we've heard a lot, you can see how it's really a church song and it's really a praise song. And that's part of its power.
So where can folks find each of you online, whether you're on social or if you have a website, just to kind of keep tabs on the journey ahead?
On what's going on. I have a website, parisbarclay.com. I'm on the Instagram. As my mother says, she puts a "the" in front of everything. She says the Facebook, she says the Instagram, at PKC Barclay. I'm not on the Twitter. I mean, I think I may have an account on the Twitter, but I haven't been on the Twitter in a while. So that's where you can track me down, see what I'm up to.
I also have a website, as everyone does these days, scottdhanson.com, not to be confused with the NFL announcer, Scott Hanson.
Yeah, so you got to get the D in there or you're going to go to football when you want to go to editing.
Right, that's right. And then I'm on Instagram as well, at shanson and the number 1. So you can find me there.
Well, I'll make sure to follow you both after this interview. But one more question, very important. We have a lot of students and a lot of younger up and coming filmmakers. What recommendations would each of you have for people that are newer to the game?
I have a lot of recommendations.
Yeah.
I'll trim it down because I do teach some, I teach young directors and young artists in college. And what I say is now is the time to make your films. It doesn't matter how they come out. You don't need big film cameras anymore. And you can distribute them yourself. Just start making a lot of films. The best education, and I'm not, opposed to film school. My son is at Tisch now at NYU. But I do think that just getting out and making films with your friends, whatever story you want to tell, sooner or later, you'll get a real fluidity for it and you'll find what works and what doesn't. And if you cut them, I've tried to cut my films now, but it's really hard. But if you start cutting them now and putting them together and learning what works, it's the best thing you can do. And just do stories that you care about. I think that's important too. Not something that's going to impress me, but something that's going to care, something that you care about. Then it will matter, no matter how specific it is. If you're an Arab immigrant and you want to tell that story, that's great. Or if you're just feeling lost in suburbia and you want to tell that story, that's great too. Just tell the story that you're most familiar with, that you're most comfortable with, and that you feel you can do most truthfully. And it'll hit. If you achieve that, it'll hit. So I would be making movies every weekend if I were a kid now and loving it.
I second all of that advice. I would also say, like, if you're looking for, if you're interested in editing specifically, there are plenty of books that talk about technology, or you can learn YouTube tutorials on technology. And it's important to understand and know all that stuff, but that's not the thing. It's editing is rewriting. And so I would encourage you to study writing in all forms: poetry, song, novel, prose, whatever. And of course, screenwriting. And then for editing specifically, there's a book by David Mamet called On Directing Film. It's about that long. And it says it's on directing, but it's really about editing, because it's about how 2 + 2 can equal 5 in a visual storytelling sense, and when you're compounding meaning across images and sounds. But really, there's no substitute for just doing it. Don't get caught in the trap of, like, you can do endless study and endless preparation and endless reading. Pick up your phone and go do a version of a joke that you like, and you can film it in your living room or out in the park, and make it 2 minutes long and throw it up on YouTube and see how the people respond. Because you can crank through stuff so much faster now and get your repetitions, and you can find your voice a lot quicker than you could have 30 years ago. It's so accessible. If you want to do it, just do it. You'll learn the rest.
And Mike, I just wanted to end with one other, because you made me think, Scott, about technical books that you could be reading. And I always recommend to people to read a book called The Art of Loving, which is a book by Erich Fromm that came out, I think, in the 70s. And it's a little stilted for today's reader, I admit. But almost every story ends up being about love, or the battle for love, or the search for love. it just ends up being the theme of human life. And what Eric Fromm talks about is all the different kinds of love, and it might inspire you to write different kinds of stories. You might there's familial love, and there's all these different things that you might think, "Ooh, this is something I can dramatize." And he tells you a little bit in his theoretical way why it works and why it doesn't, and self-love versus, it's a really interesting book just to stimulate your mind to tell stories about love. Because in today's world, I don't know if you know, in the current shitstorm, I want to see more stories about love. And that's why Sinners worked. And that's why One Battle After Another worked, is because in the end, they had a loving story, a family, people who loved each other, people who held together and fought what the demons were. And so dramatizing that love is exactly what we need right now.
That's what we did in Billy Preston. I mean,
that's why we did in Billy Preston. And our love for him, I mean, I was his biggest advocate. I so identify with him, just illuminated and infused all the choices I made. I mean, he is my hero. And I think after the film, you can see why, even though his end isn't as beautiful as I might have liked it to be. Maybe it's the way God planned it. And that's the question of the title of the film. And that's the question that Billy struggled with, I think, and that the viewers should turn over in their minds after they see the movie.
I think we'll end this with love.
Yes, end with love.
Excellent.
Yeah. Incredible interview. I want to thank you both so much for coming on today, sharing about the making of this doc and how you make films and everything else. Just a really great conversation today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike. We appreciate you.
Yeah, it was our pleasure.
We've never done this together, so this is
this is our first one together.
Yeah. So we're glad to be breaking it in with you.
Great. Really appreciate it. And also thanks to our friends at AJA, Broadfield, OWC, and Zeiss for their continued support. We'll see you all on the next episode.